Salam and welcome back to SomaliDispatch.com. My name is Abdi Gulet. Somalia's federal government and regional member states, along with the country's political stakeholders, recently settled a long-running electoral dispute. Many believe in the implementation of the electoral agreement may prove to be just as difficult. To discuss those and other Somali-related issues, we've reached out to Abdi Aynte. He is a former Somali cabinet minister and the founder of Heritage Institute. Ainta, welcome to SomaliDispatch.com. We appreciate and give thanks for you allowing us to do this and sharing your expertise with our audience. If you can start us off by giving us your reaction to Somalia's newly agreed upon election process, if you will.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think the recent agreement on the 27th of May was an important one because it really brought us back from the brink. You might recall that a month before that, toward the end of April, we were literally 5 minutes to civil war. Because of a dispute over elections and because of the April 12 extension that the parliament enacted upon. So this agreement on the 27th of May represents a return from that crisis into a more normal dialogue over the electoral process under the leadership of the Prime Minister. And I think what is crucial about this one is that all of the parties have now publicly committed to and endorsed all of the elements of the agreement, knowing that there will certainly be challenges on the road ahead, but I think there is a positive momentum that has now been created out of this agreement.
Yeah, to come back from the brink, if I may follow up, to a lot of perhaps untrained eyes, the agreement looks pretty much the same, other than the Somaliland issue, which is somewhat still outstanding. As we know, the Speaker of the Upper House is not 100% happy with the way that is handled. What do you think was the holdup for that long?
I think the agreement is both same on one side, but also fundamentally different on another side. Same in that when you look at the key aspects of the agreement, essentially it is very much similar to the 17 September agreement 2020 and the 16 February technical framework in Baidoa. I think what is fundamentally different though now is that a lot of the onus and responsibility was put upon the Prime Minister, who appears to be now enjoying greater confidence among the key stakeholders of the country. That is also to say that the key stakeholders of the country had lost trust with the president, including some of the allies of the president previously. Some of the member states, you would recall, have broken off with him on the issue of extension. So I think that is now fundamentally different in that the person who is now responsible for the implementation of this agreement is the Prime Minister, who by virtue of breaking off with President Farmajo on the illegal extension has really built a reputation for someone who can lead this process. Of course, the devil is in the details, but I think what's key here is that our electoral processes over the last 20 years were not free and fair elections. They were acceptable to the key stakeholders. That may sound like a low benchmark for some people, but for those of us who've been engaged in the process of peace building and state building, that is in and of itself a huge achievement and one that is actually worthy of celebration.
Right. I agree wholeheartedly. One of the issues that is perhaps still outstanding, and it's been ignored to a larger extent, it happens to be the fraction amongst the SNA, Somali National Army, which had a lot to do with the political rift. And as you said, coming back from the brink, how do you foresee that could be handled? What does the Prime Minister have to do? I understand there was a set of demands by both sides. Has that been largely ignored, or is that did the Prime Minister take that on?
I think the Prime Minister had taken an initial step before the 27th of May agreement, which is to redeploy units within the Somali National Army who had been deployed to various parts of the city, and essentially to guarantee them that they will not face any retribution and that they are key members of the security forces. I mean, the key point here is I think what you saw in Mogadishu toward the end of April is a demonstration of the fragility of our state. I mean, we always thought that the word fragility was a Western concept until we've now really realized how exceptionally and profoundly fragile our nation is. And we're kept together by a very thin thread of an elite compact, a constitutional process that is still underway. And if one party tries to mend that or bend it one way or the other, it faces the real risk of a total breakdown. And I think that's what we have seen. The other thing is that the security elements who have stood up to protect the Constitution, in my view, should be celebrated. I mean, here we can draw on what happened in October 1969 when a democratically elected president was killed. And the army, instead of protecting the state institutions, essentially took power by force and held it for 21 years, in the most brutal dictatorship you can imagine. I think this time around, we had an army, at least a huge chunks of the army, who said, no, that is not going to happen. Power will not be grabbed by force. We are the protectors of the constitutional order. That's what they have done. And I think they ought to be supported and congratulated for that.
Yeah, they should be commended as per some of the political allegiances that they have, might say. But one of the fears that a lot of people have is moving forward as we deal with a fragile democracy. What does it mean for the upcoming leadership, be they presidents or prime ministers? If there is a flare-up in the political arena, how could that translate outside into the army? Like, is this a new precedent per se in Somali politics?
I wouldn't say that, and I say that because for 20 years we've had various successive administrations, and we've had profound disputes across many issues on federalism, on resource sharing, and others, and we've never seen split within security forces along factions or clans or anything like that. I do not think that our security forces are there to grab power or to do to side with one group or the other. I think what you have seen toward the end of April is that the security forces, at least some of the rank and file, have felt that they're no longer within a constitutional order, and therefore that they needed to take matters into their own hands, because what they've seen is some of their own colleagues essentially protecting what was an illegal act by the parliament and by the president. And so I think this issue needs to be looked at it within the context of the fact that they have largely remained restrained, in my view, and made sure that what they were calling for is a return to the constitutional order and a dialogue on elections. And once they were reassured by the prime minister that he will lead a credible electoral process, they were more than happy to be redeployed to their bases and continue the war against Al-Shabaab and terrorist groups.
Right. One of the casualties of that political fiasco, if you will, is the president's standing in the political arena. And to speak to the extension and the parliament, usually one faction or one arm of the parliament is the lower house. The upper house was not included in this, and it's one of the hits President Farmajo took in the political arena. How do you see how he managed the extension maneuver, and then by saying the parliament actually put this forward while we know the upper house was not included in this? How does that translate in the? I know you're a constitutionalist these days. how did that, like, I haven't heard much dialogue about that. What's your view on that?
I think ultimately what happened in April and May of this year is President Farmajo departing from the political consensus of the country and the elite compact and the constitutional order that our country has had for the last 20 years. It hasn't been a perfect process, but it was one where majority of the political stakeholders of our nation collectively protected on the understanding that it is very fragile. I think what President Farmajo tried to do, attempted to do, in a daring fashion, was to try and reverse that order and essentially renew or extend his mandate by 2 years, and ignoring the upper house, even though in the rules of the parliament, both houses of the parliament have to essentially approve every single legislation and resolution. And so this was, again, not only a political fiasco, but it was also a technical administrative mistake on the part of the president, and ultimately one that almost led to a civil war and a breakdown of our governance. I think we should all be very delighted and happy that we have returned from the brink and that we're now back into a political process that is broadly acceptable to all of the key stakeholders.
Another political casualty that President Farmajo suffered has to do with the neighbors, the countries that are Somalia's neighbors, and the I don't want to say the customary or the common relationship that Somalia used to enjoy with Kenya, for example, and the Djibouti brotherly government as seen by Somalis. What do you think that is going to do to the prospects of the president? I know the president didn't yet announce that he's a candidate, but what sort of a hit would that be for the president, in your opinion?
Well, I think President Farmajo chose a path of confrontation with our neighbors from many years ago, about the last 3 or 4 years. And that path has a natural conclusion, which is a continued confrontation from those countries against President Farmajo. And we know, because of our fragility and our inability to protect our country from some of our external actors, we continue to be very vulnerable to interference from external actors. And these external actors, many of them are determined to see President Farmajo on the back foot. The fact of the matter is they will not be able to either remove him or keep him in power. I think only the Somali people and their representatives in the parliament will be able to decide that. However, external actors have in the past and continue to be a factor in our electoral processes by virtue of unleashing untold amount of money, as well as other resources, and sometimes influencing various political actors one way or the other. In fact, President Farmajo himself was a beneficiary of that arrangement 4 years ago. So it's only natural that we see a sort of a reaction to that. At the moment, I think President Farmajo's allies are very few. You've got Ethiopia, which is now facing its own domestic security challenges, but also electoral crises. You've got Asmara, Eritrea, which knows nothing about elections. Their own president essentially disputes the word itself. And you've got the Gulf countries who are actors, with the exception of Qatar. I think the rest are still very much in a very defensive position against President Farmajo. So I think the president really has dug himself deeper into a hole over the past 4 years, both domestically and internationally. And not only the foreign policy aspects of it, but the way he has handled the electoral process. You would recall, after the 12th of April extension by the parliament, the condemnation by the international community was near unanimous. I think there was only 3 countries who have really not signed the letter of condemnation, the last one on the 23rd of April, more specifically. So, there even you have one can say a near unanimous, I think, international standing or position against President Farmajo as he goes into an electoral process.
As a founder of Heritage Institute, a huge think tank in Somalia and Somali politics, You and that organization institute are both big proponents of one person, one vote. Has that gone the wayside? Is that doable now? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think that should remain an objective of the Somali people, and we should do everything we can to try and lead our country into one person, one vote. A universal suffrage election is the only path and only credible path of elections. I think it was a collective failure of all of us Somalis, whether you are in a leadership position or not, that we have so far been unable to marshal our resources into a one person, one vote up to now. Especially this administration, I think, would have been able to achieve that objective had it started working on it 4 years ago. But as we know, for 3.5 years, this administration really worked very hard to rig local elections at state levels. And so there was no intention to go for a one person, one vote. The writing was on the wall when you start from Baydawa and Dosamareb and Johar and so on and so forth. Now, the next 4 years is going to be, again, crucial for that objective, but the work has to start from day one. When the new president swore into office, he, and so far it only seems to be a he, it is very important that he engages methodically into putting in place the processes that are needed and marshal the resources that are required to make that happen. I'm going to say it is not going to be very easy, even if that president starts from day one, because of the extraordinary challenges and requirement that is needed, and also the political situation, the security situation on the ground is not making it any easier.
And finally, if I can get your reaction as we speak about one person, one vote, and in contrast, Hargeisa and Somaliland seems to have achieved somewhat a successful and pulled it off successfully, a one person, one vote, be it registered voters only activity. What do you foresee, and how could that be translated into a Somali-wide phenomenon, if you will?
Oh, that's an excellent question, Abdul Qadir. And I think, you've seen a near unanimous congratulatory notes from across the Somalis, including leaders of the federal government and everyone else, because we Somalis are very proud and should be proud of what Somaliland was able to achieve. This was a huge undertaking on the part of Somaliland. It also demonstrates that Somalis, when we put our act together, we can certainly achieve that and more. And now we see an effort going on in neighboring Puntland, which is now having, in a few months' time, a pilot one person, one vote in 3 districts, and with the objective of then mainstreaming it across Puntland. So it is very much possible. Having said that, I think, Abdul Qadir, here, it is very important to highlight that even for Somaliland, the most stable part of Somalia, it took them now nearly 16 years to organize, parliamentary and local elections. The last election for their parliament was in 2005. Of course, Somaliland organized other successful presidential elections, which are relatively simple, I would say comparatively simple to the local and parliamentary elections. But now, there are 2 levels of government positions are being competed for the 3 registered political parties. It is a huge feat, one that really deserves our unreserved recognition and support and celebration. It could be done in Somalia. It is a process rather than a panacea. Democracy in and of itself is not only about elections. It is a culture, one that engenders participation, inclusivity, democratic norms and standards, human rights and protection of human rights, and so on and so forth. So we need to collectively work toward that and learn a thing or two from our brothers and sisters in Somaliland who have done incredibly well.
And to that end, we've noticed that there are a lot of observers from West Africa, be they, but international, really and truly. For institutions like yours, Heritage Institution and others, think tanks, was there an opportunity missed in participating, and or was there any obstacles that that you wouldn't even entertain? That is like, was there a missed opportunity here?
I mean, I want to make it very clear that I cannot speak for Heritage because I'm neither in the executive at the moment. You know, I'm only sitting on the board of directors. But I know that the institution is keenly following the situation very carefully to learn from the experience of Somaliland. And you know, if it was invited, we should have. If it was invited, I'm sure it would have participated very happily in that process. And I'm not sure if they were or not invited, to be honest. But what I can tell you is that, you know, Somalis all across the world are closely monitoring this issue. One needs not to be in Hargeisa to follow the situation very, you know, carefully. And we know the process that Somaliland has taken. I mean, I, as a journalist, I vividly remember the presidential election that saw President Silanyo winning office. I was in Hargeisa covering that elections and have seen the debate of the day was about the servers, the security of the servers, the viability of the you know, biometric system, and so on and so forth. Well, now Somaliland has graduated into an iris scan where your eyes are being scanned for enhanced security. And I've seen that Puntland is already leaping forward by having the iris scan already installed in the process. So I can say that we you know, people are actually learning from Somaliland. But it is a long way. It's not going to be very easy. Stability is at the core of this, but more importantly, inclusivity is at the core of it. You know, the three main political parties in Somaliland are all participating in this democratic process in ways that really gives confidence to the citizens who then participate very happily. Whereas, as you know, in the South or in across the continent, leaders are working very hard to make it impossible for their rivals to run in electoral processes. And that's why, you know, you see the famous 90+% of victories across our continent, very regrettably.
Yes, I do. And I can't thank you enough for you know, coming in and sharing your knowledge and experience and speaking to these very important issues. I thank you so much, and I wish you continue to join us and explain these points to our listeners as they come up. Again, have a great night, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to joining you again. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for visiting our YouTube channel. You should know that you can get updated Somali-related news and information in English on our website, somalidespatch.com. And also follow and subscribe to our social media channels and pages at Somali Dispatch so you can stay connected 24/7. Thank you.